outside of her perspective in our relationships at work, regardless of your role, if we learn to focus on behavior in a really objective fashion. And so I like this framework because they are really observable behaviors. It's like what is versus the why, the cause, the motivation behind those. That's just more difficult to dig into, especially as we're getting to know people. And so this framework is based on outsiders' impressions. And it can, again, help us describe how we are perceived by others and understand that better. Now, these social styles manifest in a lot of ways. How you relate to others, how you naturally lead, how you're going to react to situations, how you use your time, and how you make decisions. Okay, so of course it's important that we understand these social styles, not only of ourselves and how we're perceived by others, but how we can perceive other social styles, knowing that they are different than ours. It's going to help us predict behavior, allow us to personalize our approach to leadership, to giving feedback, and it's going to provide us insight into how other people operate. Okay, and so with that, let's first of all figure out what your own social style is. And so there's going to be a questionnaire, a handout located. Lastly, we have our expressives. So expressives really enjoy involvement, excitement, and interpersonal interaction. So I'm just going to make sure I get my Q&A. Okay, perfect. They're going to be really sociable, stimulating, enthusiastic, and really good at involving others. So similar to amiable on that bottom of the people versus tasks. They're going to have less concern for routine and are really focused on the future, might have quick reaction times. They're, again, definitely going to be focused on people as opposed to tasks. So you can already start to imagine how some of these different styles, might conflict with each other. And we'll talk about some examples shortly. But again, these are really observable traits. So we can start thinking about those on our team and what styles they might align to. What they talk about. So drivers are C's, like I will do this. Analyticals, I think we should do this. Amiables, I feel we should do this. Expressives, I want to do this. How about communication styles? So drivers, maybe being louder, using their voice to emphasize points, similar with those expressives. Whereas analyticals and amiables might be quieter. Then we have body language. I'll give you a moment to read through these different characteristics. Okay, now let's talk about work preference. So here's where I think it gets really interesting, especially if you lead people or even if you just think about your own personal situation. So preferences, naturally of each style. Drivers are going to prefer to work in priority order. They're multitasking. They want to get a ton done. They're intense driven and they like to generate new ideas. Let's look at the opposite of that, kind of that amiable. They're really easygoing, cooperative. They are willing to be of service. They want to help unblock people. Maybe a less sense of urgency than that driver. Analyticals, that A, so thorough, attention to detail. They want, step-by-step procedure to concentrate on one thing at a time. I think about analyticals who I've worked with in the past and how, in software, a lot of times our requirements are changing, content is switching. Maybe you have meetings sprinkled throughout the day, and that's really frustrating for analyticals. They want to be focused on one thing at a time before moving to the next. And if you go on the contrast, like those expressive, so that D, they prefer that freedom. They prefer unstructured environments, lots of people interaction. It's going to hinder their creativity if they are just like given tasks to execute. So what might they struggle with? Analyticals might struggle with taking risks, making decisions. Again, they want facts and figures before moving forward. Drivers are going to be, wanting to make progress, wanting to be productive. And so they might struggle to sometimes bring others along. They might struggle with the emotion, needs, and interests of others or listening. Amiables, we talked about, they're avoiding conflict, so they might, have a lot of trouble or struggle with giving feedback, conflict, and also some ambiguous situations like creating new products or vision. And our expressives might struggle with time management and follow through. They like the creativity, they like that unstructured environment. Now let's look at some strengths and, again, how they can be perceived by other styles as potential weaknesses. So let's say, I'm a driver, I'm really independent. I'm really results oriented. I'm really candid. I'm direct with people. Other styles might perceive that as being, a poor collaborator, not bringing others along, maybe even impersonal or abrasive. Let's look at the other side. We have amiables, very supportive, very people-oriented, very diplomatic. That might be perceived by other styles as like permissive or inattentive to task or conflict avoider, or I'm an amiable, I've heard, people pleaser, or, willing to adjust my opinions a little too easily. So definitely some contrast here when we look at different styles. All right, let's talk about leading social styles now. So not necessarily looking at your own block here, but those that you lead. Okay, so how can we cater our leadership style to different social styles? Okay, first we have our driver. They're going to want to work fast towards goals. So how do we cater our social style? We can try to keep meetings short. We can try to provide challenges, expect competition, be precise, be direct, provide material and details for them to decide on. Maybe we're leading analyticals. Like, again, not expecting to see many emotions. Let's not give feedback on the fact that maybe they are not as expressive. Let's avoid chaos. Let's provide tasks with details, alternative, and precedent. What worked well in the past. Also keeping meetings short. Amiables, provide routines, structure, like process and knowing what to expect, what's going to be next. Expressives, avoiding skeptical statements. They're going to read into that. Avoid tasks with too much detail that's going to hinder their creativity. Okay, now motivating social styles. Let's think about how we can motivate while we're leading. Drivers, like, get to the point, talk about results and clear options. That's going to be really motivating for them. Like, where are we going and why are we doing what we're doing? Analyticals, it's going to be really motivating if they have a lot of facts, if we're thorough and well prepared, we're asking questions and being really specific. Amiables are going to be really motivated if you listen intently to what they're saying, maybe even soften your language and assume they'll likely take things personally, even if you're not intending to. Expressives, showing how interested you are in their ideas and embracing their enthusiasm. Okay, so we've talked about some ways to adapt our social style. Now, I want to just cover quickly, like, when should we adapt our style? I think adapting our social style is going to really help build that emotional intelligence and be a really versatile leader. And so I would say, in a lot of cases, if you notice that someone else has a different style, like, maybe you can lean in and adapt and build that relationship. But when to adapt, definitely when something important is at stake. Like, if the other person is clearly under stress, it's going to be that much harder for them to, like, meet you halfway and adapt theirs. So maybe you can take part in adapting your own social style. Or also just when establishing a new relationship. Okay, how do we adapt our social style? So in this slide, I want you to look at the box that you fall under. So your style here, and I'll give you a moment to read through, like, things to be cautious of, and then kind of ways to adapt. So skills that you can build to lead into and work better with other styles. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to show you this slide now. I love this one because it kind of maps out, like, if you think about who do you find most difficult to work with, maybe it's the style that's like on the opposite side of that spectrum. Maybe it's not. But some tips for working specifically with each of those styles that you might find difficult to work with. So let's walk through an example. Let's say you find drivers, difficult to work with. They're very direct. They're maybe even harsh or impersonal. If you find yourself, working with them, ways to be a better partner is like making an effort to be more efficient. So trying not to ramble on, trying not to get, too far into the details, too far into that analysis, too far into like what you feel we should do. Try to really be efficient. And so to support in order to support their decisions and actions, because that's really what they're going to be focused on. And for decisions, giving them options and control. I'll never forget, I once had a leader who was, now I have the vocabulary to describe it, but he was absolutely a driver. And so in our one-on-ones, I would go and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going through all this and this and this. And I don't know how to move forward with this. And he was like, you know what? Just come back to me with like 3 different options. I trust that you're doing the right research. Come back with 3 options and I'll just let you know how we should proceed with that. So getting that feedback, was a little tough because I wanted to talk through, my feelings and where I thought we should go. But as a driver, he just wanted, kind of that, okay, what are the options? And I'll tell you how to move forward from here. Being really efficient. Okay, now this slide also walks through, your style, the other person's style. And so you could read through each, like, how could you adapt your style to, again, lean into theirs more so that you can build that relationship. I'll give you a moment to read through this. Okay, so that wraps up our section on social style. So hopefully that gave you an opportunity just to learn a little bit about your social style and how you might be perceived by others. And we will use this learning in our next section on feedback. Okay, I want to just start by acknowledging that, giving feedback is difficult. That's why, we're in this course today, right? And I think it's difficult for a lot of reasons. A lot of things run through our head when we approach a feedback conversation. And as an amiable, I can absolutely relate to a lot of these. It's quite terrifying sometimes. What if the person gets defensive? What if they start to yell? What if they start crying? What if they don't listen to me? What if I'm wrong here? What if my perspective isn't right? Who am I to give them this feedback? Am I being too nice as I'm giving them feedback? Am I being too harsh as I give them this feedback? Okay, I think another reason why it's difficult is that I really think that we haven't really biologically evolved as fast as society has. So in these uncomfortable, like almost threatening situations, our brain is treating the situation like it's needing to, run away from a tiger and not having this professional conversation with a colleague or a team member. And so your brain is actually diverting blood to your arms and your legs. It's prioritizing physical strength as opposed to that ability to comprehend this emotional conversation. Okay, so we're prioritizing survival over reason and emotional control. I think another reason is that we as leaders don't always set clear expectations. So this makes feedback difficult because it's only fair to share feedback with someone when you have first really set clear expectations. So I have an example to share. One thing I learned the hard way. I joined a new team. This was several years back. And, prior to that team, my team before that had really awesome on-call procedures. So if there was an issue in production, they were just super sufficient. They're okay, I'm on this. I'm going to take this. I'm going to share an update. They had amazing processes. So I always knew if something was going on, what the status was. So when I joined that new team, we got an incident and I was what is going on? Who is covering this? And so I shared some feedback with the person who was on call that they weren't really, sharing enough updates with me. And what I didn't realize was there was another whole channel where they, had shared those updates. And so that wasn't fair for me to give feedback. I should have leaned into curiosity, especially since I was new, and said, hey, what's the process for, keeping everyone updated on the status of an incident, right? So as leaders, we have to make sure that we are setting clear expectations before we give feedback. Another reason is, we don't adapt our social style. We talked before about the importance of adapting that social style to make sure that we are meeting the other person halfway as we're having these really crucial conversations, like giving feedback. Now you are aware of your social style, but a lot of people aren't. And so this makes it difficult to really effectively facilitate this type of conversation in a productive way if we don't adapt our social style. And so I'll share some examples of how we can adapt that social style as we're giving feedback in a little bit. but I'm going to keep covering why giving feedback is difficult. Hopefully some of it resonates. I want to make sure that we don't forget the why, right? We're not just like, okay, this is a checklist, on my items of things to do. I have to give this person feedback. Let's make sure we focus on the why. Let's focus on those good reasons why we're giving someone feedback. Remind yourself and the person that you are giving feedback by saying things like, I want to see you keep growing. And here are some growth areas that I have determined. This is a new perspective, that I have that you might not be aware of. And I'm here to help you grow. And that's really the why of feedback, right? It's to help people course correct, or it's just to help identify those growth areas that they might not be aware of. Okay, so I want to introduce this idea of radical candor, which was coined and written about by Kim Scott, who is an absolute boss. Okay, so in Radical Candor, which is a book, and there's lots of YouTube videos you can find on this, she states that really good feedback is radically candid, meaning we have to make sure that there's no room for interpretation. And the term radical means, we weren't always conditioned to explain what we really think. So, a lot of us grew up, if you don't have something nice to say, just don't say anything at all. And so we avoid these conversations sometimes. We don't want to point out what's not going well for someone. But what we have to realize is that, again, we forget the why. The why is to help them grow. And so we think about it that way. It's actually extremely kind to give feedback. Okay, but she describes radical candor as really caring personally about that person. So knowing that we are human beings at work before whatever our title is, before engineer, we're human first. And so we have to be seen as such. And so we have to find time for those really real conversations to get to know people, learning what is important to them, and then challenge directly. So this shows that you care enough about that person, again, to help them grow, to point out what's not going well or a new perspective that you have. And so here's this access that she describes. Again, lots more information in that book. If you want to read it, it's awesome. But thinking on this access of caring personally, or just perhaps being a little bit aggressive in that feedback, forgetting about the fact that that person is a human first. And the sweet spot is that radical candor. So we care about them, and we're also making sure that we're being direct enough so that our point gets across. Okay, so before I roll into some characteristics of effective feedback, I want to know, because this is one of the most common questions I get, is who am I to share what's not going well for someone? I always like to lean into giving feedback and lean into curiosity. So I always like to say, here's a perspective that I have. I might not be right, but I wanted to point this out in case you weren't aware of this. Sometimes, of course, you have to be more direct than that. So we have to say, this is unacceptable, or this is unprofessional, or this, you are not meeting expectations. So, right. But I would say most feedback conversations, try leaning into curiosity first. Seek to understand it's going to be a conversation and not just you talking. And so we'll walk through some examples shortly after we give some characteristics of, that effective feedback. Okay, I think when it really boils down to it, right, it's pretty straightforward. It's what is that person doing well, and what does that person need to work on to improve? So what is this perspective that you have that can help them understand a growth area, that can just help them keep growing and keep getting better? Okay, so number one, it's framed in context. We want to make sure they know exactly what you're talking about. Yesterday at this meeting, or just, an hour ago at this meeting, can the situation be described as if it was recorded on a video camera? Again, effective feedback is grounded in objectivity. Timely, so we're not waiting until that one-on-one the following week to pile on a bunch of feedback, from the past week. We want to make sure that we give it as timely as possible so that, again, the fact that it's framed in context can really resonate. All right, then it's actionable. So how are we going to move forward from here? So again, once you're engaged in that conversation, maybe you're learning something new. Maybe they're like, oh no, here's some information that you didn't know. But let's say they're like, okay, yep, I understand this. How can I grow from here? How should we check in on this skill? Okay, and then it's intentional, and specifically it has positive intent. So we have to intend to help the individual grow and thrive. And so sometimes maybe you're not in the right mental state to give someone effective feedback if we don't have positive intent. If we are feeling resentful, or if we're feeling like personally hurt, maybe by something that they did, let's take a step back and make sure that we have positive intentions as we are approaching that feedback conversation. Okay, so here is our formula that I love to use: behavior, outcome, next steps, and ideal outcome. Okay, so behavior. This is really, again, where we're framed in context. This is the facts, the who, what, when, where. Then the outcomes. What were the outcomes of that behavior? Then next steps. Again, we're not just saying, here's exactly what you should do. We're engaging in a conversation. How do you want to move forward from here? What do you think we could take as a next step? How do you want to check in on this? And then the ideal outcome. What is that ideal outcome? What does that growth area look like? Like, what could this look like in a month if they work on this particular skill set? Hopefully some of these examples will illustrate what this looks like too. Okay, so let's talk through some examples. Oops, okay. Sorry. Make sure we have no questions first. Okay, perfect. So first we have Gerald. Gerald is a domain hoarder. Gerald is that person who rules over one piece of the application. They're the only person who knows the ins and the outs of every class, method, pattern of that area of the code base, constantly tweaking and not letting others in. Maybe he doesn't even get code reviews because no one knows how to review his code. What can we say to Gerald? He picks up a story on that specific service again. Okay, Gerald, I noticed that you only seem to be picking up work related to this consumer event service. This has prevented the rest of the team from understanding that area of the code base. That's the outcome. Next sprint, when this is being direct, like, here's something specific that you should do. Please pick up a feature outside of this service. Ideal outcome, like, paint the picture of what better looks like. This is going to remove future bottlenecks in development and support of the application. It's going to help the rest of the team learn and also help you expand your knowledge of other areas of that application. Okay, let's talk through another example. We have Donna, the giant pull request, the person who comes back, maybe they pick up a task and 3 weeks later, it's like fully fleshed out. They're like, okay, I'm feeling really confident with this. They didn't get any reviews or they didn't collaborate, with other members of their team. So they go quiet, they come back with like this giant pull request. Maybe they are afraid of others seeing their work in progress, but this is resulting in a really low quality review. And again, it's just less collaborative. So that's kind of what you're feeling as a manager. All right, so what can we say? Donna, I noticed that you haven't shared an update on this feature in over a week. Lead into curiosity here. Like, how is everything going? Is there anything that I can do to unblock you? But this has prevented the rest of the team from understanding your progress. So here are some specific things you can do. Next steps. Share daily updates. Ideal outcome. What is that going to do? Why is it important that she does this? And it's going to promote better collaboration across the team. This also helps us understand and fix potential issues, with requirements. Okay, how about the person who is late consistently without notice, requiring others to catch her up because she misses key details? Okay, what can we say? Says Nita, I noticed that you arrived late to stand up the past 4 days. This caused a distraction to the team. They were required to repeat their updates, like very factual, right? Please try join meetings on time or just let us know if you'll be late. This is going to help promote better communication and expectations across the team. Now let's talk about catering feedback to different social styles. Now that we all have a shared understanding and vocabulary of what these social styles mean and, again, how they might perceive different situations. Okay, so in both of these examples, that situation is going to be the same. So Taylor has a habit of checking in her code and moving on to the next task without really paying attention to the required upstream and downstream steps needed to bring that task over the line or to full completion. So I'll let you read through that feedback, thinking about if Taylor was an analytical. Okay, so hopefully you noticed a few things here. We're really thorough. We're providing exact dates, times. We're well prepared. We said, hey, based on precedent, so based on what worked well in the past for this client, here's what I think we should do. Now let's look at this if Taylor was an amiable and how we could cater knowing that she's that social style. Okay, so hopefully you can notice some differences here. And I want to note that I did a workshop about a month ago, and we were in person in a room, and we kind of all, rose our hands and got to know what each other's social styles were. And some of the analyticals saw this slide, and they're like, why would you even bring up Greg? Like, that's really odd. That's really distracting. Like, I just want to know what I did wrong. And the analysts were like, no, this is like the analytical seems, way too confusing. Like, why does it matter? So I thought this was really funny just to see and hear some of the analyticals and reactions to this amiable feedback and how they would have not taken that well. So again, like the point being, we have to make sure that we're catering our social styles. And this is a little bit like dramatic of an example, but I want to show, the amiable, like they care about those relationships. Like who was next in the sequence that they let down? That's going to resonate with them more. Okay, so wrapping up, the section on feedback, I want us to note that, it's not you versus the person, it's us versus the problem. Again, we have to intend to help that person grow. We have a perspective we can share that they might not be aware of. And that's our role, to help make them aware of that perspective and that growth area. And so this feedback is, right, a tool for communication. It's really an observation with context. You might be wrong, right, in that conversation. You might be wrong. You might be missing a piece of context that they have that you didn't have. And that's why it's a conversation. But it's concise and it's focused. We're not piling on. So feedback is not a weapon. It's not an accusation. We're not using it to jump to conclusions. So let's look at an example. Like yesterday, you arrived an hour late. That's a fact, right? We don't just want to say, hey, you can't be trusted because you arrived an hour late. Let's just stick with the facts. Yesterday you arrived an hour late, and here were the impacts of that. Okay, a few more tips, whenever possible, like trying to remove yourself from the equation can be effective. So, use of words like this can be offensive to some. I even heard too, someone shared an example of, that isn't even as effective as it could be. Like you could say, hey, use of words like this would be a little bit more inclusive than the words that you use. So again, giving them pointers to what better could look like. Or, focusing on the product and not the person. So instead of you wrote low quality code, like this code could be more performant with use of this. And I want to note that in order to really make feedback effective, it's all about how the way that person receives that feedback. So you can leave that conversation and be like, okay, I'm done. They got it. Like they know exactly what they need to do. That's not always the case. One, we have to make sure that they received that effectively. So we're checking back in on that. But then we have to acknowledge that there's other things that happen, right, after we give them that insight. So we give them that insight. They have to know what they need to develop. Then they also have to have the motivation to improve that feedback. Are they willing to invest the time and the energy? And sometimes it's a matter of capability. So sometimes maybe they don't have that skill yet. Maybe there's knowledge required. Maybe that's connecting them with a mentor or a resource, a training resource that they can leverage to work to improve that. So our work doesn't stop at just giving them that insight, making them aware of this perspective that you have. Other things have to happen in that pipeline in order for true growth to happen. Okay, but I also want to acknowledge that great feedback has to start with trust. Let's say you're a new leader on a team. You can't just jump in and start giving out feedback, right? People are like, who are you? And why does your perspective even matter? I don't trust you. So we have to like build that trust over time, before we start giving that feedback. And I think that's really essential. Let's talk about recognition, which is, of course, positive feedback, right? It's also our jobs to give positive feedback, not just constructive. And with this, I think it's so important that we're really specific. Because sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, you did a great job on that. Well, what exactly did I do great at? Let's be really specific so that people know, where their strengths are. I appreciate your attention to detail with this project. Your positive attitude in that meeting helped us get through this difficult decision, or your expertise with this has provided the team with a new perspective. Thank you for sharing this skill. So if I'm tempted to say, hey, great job, to a person who maybe led a presentation or facilitated a meeting, I want to get more specific. Like, what do I think was so great about that? And let's also acknowledge that not all recognition looks the same. So just as we're working to build trust with the person, we're also getting to know what type of feedback they might prefer. So some people are uncomfortable being recognized in front of like 100 people at an all-team meeting. Some might love that kind of feedback. Some might prefer just like a direct message when they did something awesome that you want to recognize. So get to know people and what they prefer for recognition. Okay, so we have a question here. And also, yeah, folks, please feel free just to use that Q&A widget. I'll keep an eye on that. Our question is, what if they are not willing to invest the time and the energy and are not capable? Okay, so I think these are two different questions. One, if they're not willing to invest the time and the energy, let's first of all let's point out the fact that, like, again, this is another perception. So, I'm perceiving that you are not willing to dedicate the time and the energy to address this growth area that we discussed. Give them that and let them respond. So maybe they are working on it. Maybe you're not aware that they're working on it. Maybe they aren't. So they're like, yeah, I don't think, this isn't something that's important to me. Then it's your role as a manager to say, like, how vital it is that they do address that. This is impacting your ability to do your job, or, this is putting your job at risk. Like, making sure that they understand the severity of not addressing that feedback. Because sometimes we have, like I said before, like, we assume that they know, what we are thinking, and it is not kind to not be very direct in the results of them not addressing that feedback. Right? We have to make sure that we're setting expectations too. And then for the second part, like, what if they're not capable? This is where your job comes in to say, like, okay, here are some key skills that I see missing. Look for those resources for them. Help connect them with someone. Do practices. I mean, this can range from a lot of things. Like, maybe it's a technical skill. So maybe it's getting some like formal training, or maybe it's saying, maybe job alignment isn't correct. Like, maybe it's about talking about, is a different role better for them? Okay, let's see. How can we trigger in simple steps a sincere and authentic culture of recognition in a new team in the process to build its culture? Oh, this is an awesome question. Okay, so a couple ideas come to mind. One, like, if you have like a weekly or like some type of recurring team meeting, maybe even start it out with like, everyone's going to go around the room and do like popcorn recognition. So like, I'm going to say, okay, I'll start it off. I'm going to give Joe recognition. Joe's going to pick someone else to give recognition. So they can kind of pick who maybe they've worked with until you get to like the end of the line. So like, oh, Joe, thank you so much for, the comments that you left when you were reviewing my code. It really helped me learn more about this. It can be something so simple. So just get into the like habit of giving recognition that way in team meetings. Another thing you could try, I know some teams do this where I heard this idea. They did like so whether you do it virtually or in person, they had like it's like a speed dating, but for feedback. So everyone had like Post-its, and they had a Post-it for every other person on the team. And so they would write out like the feedback that they wanted to give to that person, both constructive and positive. And then over the course of however much time you need to get, everyone to pair up with each person, they would sit together and like share that feedback. And then they'd also hand them the physical Post-it if you're in person. So then that person had like those physical Post-its to go home with, reflect on and chat with their manager about. So that's another thing maybe you do on like a quarterly basis, is this like, we call it speed dating feedback session. Okay, I'm just going to check these off as I get through them. Okay, let's see. What if you don't know their social style? Ooh, that's a great question. So Again, social styles are observable traits. So hopefully over time, right, you're going to start, as you're observing them in meetings, in one-on-ones, you can start to pick up on some of those. But honestly, with every team I've been on, except I need to do with this most recent one, we took the social style questionnaire together. So don't be afraid to do that as a team activity so that you can directly learn about and talk about your social styles. But I like this one because it is observable traits. So hopefully as you get to know that person, you can start to pick up on what that social style might be. And again, that book, People Styles at Work, is really going to dive deeper into each social style. I just did the very high level. So hopefully that will help you understand and get to know those social styles. Okay, so let's also normalize feedback. This kind of goes back to, that first question. Okay, so a lot of teams have those 360 feedback tools. Those are awesome. Maybe you do them, quarterly or whatever, just collecting feedback from the key partners that you work with, your boss, people who report to you. That's a great way to do it. And then I did touch on those other ones, like team meeting traditions. Maybe you started off with, recognition, for all of, my leaders, sometimes my leadership team, we always start our offsites with, hey, here's something I really appreciate about you. Here's something I think that you can do better. So ways to normalize that, right? Okay, so we are at our third section of the day. Again, please don't forget to leverage that Q&A portal. We're going to walk through some conversation templates to facilitate career discussions with people on your team. So knowing that feedback should happen all the time. And I also like to set up time to specifically discuss career and growth and what that means to people. Knowing that in one-on-ones, you're oftentimes very tactical, they go super fast. And so I like to carve out time on a quarterly basis to talk specifically about career and growth. Okay, so I'm going to provide, I think it's 6 or 7 different templates that you can use or formats that you can use. And so what I do again is I just set up a quarterly career status, 45 minutes to an hour, in addition to those one-on-ones. And I say, this is kind of choose your own adventure. I want the person to really drive the conversation. Of course, I'm, filling in details, kind of coaching, asking questions. But I say, choose your own adventure. Here are some different options and bring your own if you want to. Okay, so these are the different formats that I'll walk through today. So step 1, you have them select a format. And I'll walk through what each of these are. Okay, number 1 is open questions. Maybe they're yeah, I'm just going to come and let's just chat about what growth means to me. So you can give them these questions beforehand and they can kind of reflect on them. And then you can just talk together throughout that hour. You will learn a ton about what growth means to that person and how you can help them navigate their career. Okay, number 2 is this I'm a commitment to. I love this one because sometimes we set these really high level goals, I want to build quality software, or, I'm a commitment to being a good mentor. And sometimes they're I don't really know what that means and how to make progress on that. And so this one helps us get really low level. So let's say, or you could say, what are your commitment to this quarter? Okay, I'm a commitment to quality software. What does that mean to you? Let's get really specific so that we know at the end of the quarter if it is or isn't completed. Okay, so how are we going to do that this quarter? Again, these are binary. We know if they are or aren't completed. So what does it mean to you to write excellent documentation? And is there anything specific that you could set as a goal that we can track throughout this quarter? So this process isn't really documented well, so I'm going to take that on. Or, I improve test coverage. Okay, let's set a specific goal for us to track over the next quarter. Let's look at another example in this I am a commitment to format. I'm a commitment to innovative ideas. Again, a little high level, what does that really mean to you? And how will you know if that's done at the end of the quarter? Okay, this is the third format. So categories of goals. Maybe you just have a tradition where you go through, let's pick a goal for each of these categories. So productivity, efficiency, education, personal development. And each quarter they set a really specific goal to align with each category. Here are some examples with that, with the process or efficiency, technical goals. that they could select. I would argue that some of these are even too high level. So again, getting really specific. Maybe on like the people leadership side, goals that they could select. Okay, so that's format 3. Format 4, anti-goals. I loved this one. I did this one with a couple of folks on my team one quarter. They chose this anti-goals. So the gist of this is you basically say, like, tell me what bad would look like. Like, what is your worst possible day at work? Or what would your worst possible quarter look like? You know, some people said, like, oh, long commute, like a day packed full of meetings. I feel burned out. I feel like I'm not challenged. And then we work backwards from there. So like, okay, what can we do to avoid this long commute or to avoid a day packed full of meetings? What are some things that we can change to make sure that we're not trending in that direction? So this one was really fun to set like specific goals. Okay, next format is this personal growth plan. So asking a couple prompting questions. Again, they'll have this available so that they can come to that meeting really prepared. You know, I want people to know me for this, or in the next 6 to 12 months, I want to get this done. You know, years from now, I want to do this. To further grow this quarter, therefore, I should focus on these skills. You know, what will I do by when, and who will support me and how? So just a really good, you know, conversation facilitation guide there. Okay, last format 6, this one that I call Zoom Out. So in this, you have ISO. IC stands for individual contributor. So like that engineer in your team to reflect on maybe like a week before you meet, like what are the things that you did really well? What are 3 things that you can work to improve? And then I also ask if they select this format to like give me a heads up so that I can also reflect on that. So what were 3 things they did well? What were 3 things that we can work to improve? Question on a quarterly basis. You present these templates before and allow the team members to drive the discussion. Yep. That's exactly it. And I also, like, in addition to saying, yep, choose your own adventure, like some people use the same format over and over again. So we just have like a career doc that we, you know, continue looking at each quarter, and maybe things change, maybe we talk about it, or some people select a new format every single quarter. And then, yeah, I really encourage that person to be driving it. I'm there as a coach to ask follow-up questions, to like learn about that, because then I know that in the future, maybe there's an opportunity I see that is aligned with a goal, or, you know, in one-on-ones, I could say, hey, you know, at our last career status, you said it was really important to you that you don't have a long day of meetings. Like, how has that been going? Have you discovered any meetings that you can like shift to different times that are more convenient, or, you know, anything that you've removed, or, you know, has that surfaced any additional issues that we can talk through? Okay. And in that too, I like to also add throughout the course of the year, I'll stumble upon some like really interesting articles. And so each quarter, I also just like to say, yep, here are the format options, you know, bring your own if you want. And here are some like inspiring articles about growth that I've discovered. So I like to add a new article that we can even chat, reflect on together, as well as that format. Okay, so we are on to our last section today on facilitating straightforward, productive, and enjoyable one-on-ones. Okay, of course, one-on-ones are essential for us technical leaders to leverage to really check in on people. I remember when I first became a manager, I would honestly dread these because I was like, I have to be so prepared. Like, some people are so quiet and awkward, and I hate silence. And so I would really dread those conversations. I was like, what am I going to talk about? How am I going to fill this time? But I realized that these are really the most important aspects of our role. We have them for a lot of different reasons, right? We're taking a pulse on the person, we're fostering trust, we're gaining alignment, we're giving feedback, we're discussing career direction, we're providing context as to like, what are we working on organizationally? How does their work tie into the bigger picture? We're celebrating wins. You know, we're understanding what the person is thinking and feeling, and we're working to strengthen that personal connection. Now, again, if I had like one tip for myself when I first started at this, It's that I don't have to do all the talking. In fact, I should do the least amount of talking in that one-on-one, right? But I felt like it was up to me to make sure that I am fully preparing that agenda. What are we going to talk about? What can I share with them? But this meeting is actually meant for that other person, right? To speak their mind, to share their ideas, to solicit feedback. And so this requires like really excellent listening skills. It's listening without distractions, without glancing at your other screen to check in on an email or Slack, or without looking at your phone. It's so disrespectful to not give someone your full attention, especially in a one-on-one, especially when they report to you. And so if you find yourself really distracted by something, or you need to address another situation urgently, just ask if another time could work. I would much rather have someone say, hey, I am distracted by X, Y, and Z thing, and I want to give you my full attention. So do you mind if we meet at this time instead? Okay, so great listeners, other qualities, right? They're focused on their attention on the other person. They're asking follow-up questions. They're paraphrasing, clarifying. They're observing that person's energy, their mood, their tone of voice. Do they have high or low energy today? What is their body language saying, perhaps? What isn't being said here? Tactically, I like to have one-on-ones regular, scheduled, usually weekly, depending on the size of your team, but minimum every other week for 30 minutes. They're rarely missed. If you need to move them out, adjust that time, just give them a heads up on why. And then, of course, they're focused on that team member. Okay, so the golden ticket for me to realize that these are so important and just get so comfortable, now they're my favorite meetings of the day, is to really prepare just like I would for any other meeting. And so what I like to do is just revisit our notes from last time, both personal, work-related topics. So we have just a shared agenda. We use Google, so we have a shared agenda that we can both add to throughout the week. We can know and kind of prepare what we're going to chat about. And then I also make sure that I'm reviewing status updates beforehand. Let's not use that valuable one-on time just to talk through what they're up to and do they have an update on X, Y, and Z project. We can use other asynchronous or even meetings to discuss a status. This is the time for you to get to know that person and figure out how you can help them. Sometimes this also means we get into these coaching conversations, right? And this is an awesome and very empowering way to help someone grow. Asking questions that enable that person to reach a new perspective or a solution on their own. So if they come to us with a problem, we're not just saying, yep, here's exactly what you should do. So let's do a quick coaching recap, right? I think, again, this is a very empowering way for a person to come to a solution independently. So, this usually comes about in problem solving. So if someone comes to you with a problem, instead of saying oh, yeah, this is what I would do, let's actually start with active listening. So, what I hear you saying is this. Now, I want to acknowledge that it is so tempting, and sometimes it seems like it makes the most sense just to be oh, yeah, here's exactly what you should do, right? This is going to be our instinct to just give them advice. It's natural to say, here's what I would do in this situation. But at best, this is a short-term solution. And they're never going to really learn how to solve similar problems in the future. Okay, so what we can do instead is really ask probing questions. So I want to introduce this GROW model that I love for effective coaching. Again, lots of books, lots of things you can find on this, but I'm just going to do a really high-level recap because I think it illustrates how you can guide someone to an answer so that they can solve that independently. Okay, so again, they come to the problem. Let's walk through this GROW model. So first, we're really helping them to establish a goal. What is this problem that they're trying to solve? So we're asking questions okay, what's the result you're trying to achieve with this? Why is this important to you? What are the benefits if you solve this problem? Then we're getting to that current reality. So we're making sure that you and the person you're coaching really gain an awareness of that current situation. So really using patience, active listening, and not trying to rush that conversation. Then options. After we both have a really clear understanding of that situation, let's turn to what we can do to reach that goal. So again, this is going to take over the course of definitely 30 minutes, maybe longer, right? So we're not rushing that conversation. Okay, then way forward. So we're helping that person feel really confident that they, know what they're committed to. They know what they're going to do next. There's a clear action plan. No, I want to acknowledge too that like we're not always jumping into coaching, right? There are some things in which we should just guide and give feedback. Whereas such as, sharing, telling, educating. Coaching is more like active exploring and listening. So I think about things where I'm like, okay, where should I maybe not coach? Like, when is it not appropriate to coach? I think there's certain situations like, hey, there's only one right answer. So let's not be like, where's the bathroom? Well, where do you think the bathroom is? How would you architect this building, right? That's going to be a little bit offensive and frustrating. Also, like if the situation is dire, like if it's, there's a production issue or we're hitting some timelines